If you've been using Jira for quite some time like I have, you've probably realized that projects were renamed to spaces. So here in this image, you can see that projects here was now been transitioned to be called spaces. This is actually a really helpful article, and I'll drop it in the notes as to why Atlassian went through and actually renamed projects to spaces in Jira. And that's really because it's designed to be more encompassing to all users that typically document and track their work within Jira. So, for example, use cases and probably why projects were named projects to begin with rather than spaces is because you can keep track of a project with a start date and a finish date, so a fixed timeline essentially. That's why it was called projects to begin with. However, as different groups started adopting and using Jira, they really didn't use it for just one project. There were lots of different use cases. Some of those use cases, a really good example would be a marketing team. So if we go over to my demo Jira org, you'll see that I have this marketing Kanban board. This is a really good example of you might need a space to record all of the different projects and initiatives that they're working on. So it could be for a team that has lots of different projects and not necessarily just one project that they're tracking for. And the term spaces would really be more encompassing for a team like a marketing team to keep track of all of the different initiatives, all the different projects that they're working on within one location or one space. So here you can see that in this demo org of mine, I have an epic for blogs, an initiative for creating videos for our YouTube channel. And so that really makes sense as to why you would want to call it a space where you keep track of all of your work for all of your projects that your team is working on. Another really good example of a team that would prefer maybe the term space as to a project would be an infrastructure team. So an infrastructure team likely supports lots of different pieces of technology within an organization. So they have all different projects that they're helping support. They have sustainment and maintenance initiatives that they're working on. And just need one space to keep track of all of their different requests that are coming from all of these different projects and other cross-functional teams, as well as their regular work that they need to perform maintenance on and upgrades on. And so that's another really good example that would prefer the term space as opposed to a project, because they're working on lots of different projects and they need one central space to keep track of all of those things. Team, right? With Jira Service Management, you can create an IT service management portal. Working on a project, they just have a space where they're keeping track of all of their tickets and all of their requests that they need to maintain. And so that's really their intention behind it, is that spaces is a more encompassing and inclusive term for all the different users that still use Jira. All of the functionality that existed when spaces were called projects in Jira will still exist. So if you do just want to have one project, for example, in a development project, you can still use projects or spaces in Jira the same way that you did before to keep track of one project. At 3 is Success, we typically keep track of projects within our Jira org, and so I was a little taken back by the renaming convention of projects to spaces within Jira. However, after reading this article, like I said, I'll leave this in the chat, and really reading some of the user comments, I started thinking about all the different organizations that we've supported in the past and have worked with in the past. The term spaces could be more encompassing. So I know it is a different change for the user interface, but you should still have all of the functions that you had when it was called projects as opposed to spaces. There are a couple of other points here that others have made throughout the Atlassian community. One of them is that the term spaces in Jira promotes more continuity and consistency between both Confluence and Jira. Some have also mentioned that it could be confusing for admins, because typically when you hear space, your mind goes to Confluence, and now we're going to have to ask, is it a space in Jira? Is it a space in Confluence? So there are some pros and cons to any change, but I did at least want to provide this video so that you can think through and pros and cons and get a better understanding of why they renamed projects to spaces within Jira and how that could be more encompassing and more inclusive for all users, as opposed to those who typically just use Jira to keep track of a project. The other reason that I think they renamed projects in Jira to spaces is because they've also released a projects app. So you've probably seen both projects and goals within Jira. If you do use Jira in Confluence Cloud or Jira Service Management, you've probably seen those pop up. In this video series, I'm going to create some other videos specifically about projects and about goals, as well as how you can, as an administrator, to just make sure what's available to your team is only what you want them to see. I'll go over those, but I could see why they would want to rename Jira Projects to Jira Spaces when they were releasing the Jira Projects app, because they don't want those to be confused. They are two separate items, and so we'll be sure to cover what that looks like in another video in this series.